A violent day here in Baltimore. You're taking a live look at the latest shooting seen on West Patapsco Avenue in South Baltimore. A man was hurt in a shooting there. Homicide detectives are investigating. One person was killed in another shooting today that happened near Grace Medical Center. Another woman was hurt in that incident. As another violent weekend comes to an end and the city continues to grapple with a pace of gun violence that shows really no signs of slowing down, one city leader is once again looking for answers. Fox 45's Riel Creighton live now with more on this violent weekend. Riel?
Emily, the number of shooting victims in the city is well into the triple digits, and that number pushed higher by multiples today. One local leader says all of that gunfire, whether people survive or tragically do not, it shows that there is an intent to kill in this city, and that is something that we have got to figure out. It's the story of the last week in Baltimore City, East 21st Street, Maryland Ave, 2400 Liberty Heights, the 3500 block of West Belevedere, and on. Not pushpins, people, marking lives lost, bloodshed in 7 days, 6 dead.
To think that we are still at this level of violence in our city.
Part of the city's change movement, Act Now Baltimore pastor Dr. Cleveland Mason.
The sacredness of life is lost among us.
For whom the diagnosis comes easy, answers much harder. Years in, thousands of victims.
I lost my son in January 2019.
The grief of mothers running decades deep and generations.
I also lost 2 sons. And my son, Gerard, lost his father to violence.
This weekend, 4 shot, 1 killed, pushing another mournful milestone closer to becoming reality. 7 years straight of more than 300 fallen to Baltimore City streets.
I don't think that we can ever afford to get to the place where this becomes normal.
Dr. Mason says it's time to reclaim neighborhoods.
We will never get back to the place of having peaceful neighborhoods without people being invested in the neighborhood itself. You cannot simply go in your house and close your door and act like there's nothing going on outside.
In the grips of a violent weekend coming to an end, Dr. Mason sees hope in the mayor's plan for fighting the violence, but also one major pitfall for the lives on the line every week. It can't happen fast enough.
The disheartening thing is so many of the things that are proposed take so much time in order to have an impact on the community. We do need to see some changes take place almost immediately.
And the immediate action that he hopes to see are some serious consequences for those caught carrying illegal guns and, of course, for those who choose to use them. But the other tragic part of trying to tally these numbers is that they change by the day, sometimes by the hour. Since we actually filed our report, we've just learned that another 20-year-old man was shot and killed in the city streets.
Well, new census data shows how Baltimore is continuing to lose residents by the thousands. The results of the 2020 census finds that the city's population shrunk over 5.5% from almost 621,000 people in 2010 to 585,700 people now. That's the lowest population for the city in more than a century.
Experts
say and leaders agree that crime is a huge, if not the driving factor of people leaving the city. Alexa Ashwell questioned what's being done to reverse this decades-long trend. She joins us live now with what she's learned. Alexa?
Well, Maxine, the mayor has announced a growth plan that will launch this fall, but some fear Baltimore can't afford to wait that long.
In Baltimore, more than 400 people have been shot, another more than 200 murdered. The city on pace to once again surpass 300 homicides for the 7th year in a row. Baltimore's crime problem feeding another truth. People are leaving the city because of it.
When the crime doesn't seem to be controllable, people don't feel safe. That's not
they don't want to live in a place like that.
Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott addressing the city's population decline as now confirmed in the 2020 census. Just yesterday, releasing a growth plan that includes building public safety as a top priority. How does he plan to do this? In this release, Scott pointing to the implementation of his comprehensive violence prevention plan. Former Baltimore Police Deputy Commissioner Jason Johnson believes one of the first steps should be addressing staffing within the department.
It has almost no discretionary resources to go after those violent repeat offenders, to create a visible presence in communities where people feel unsafe.
A need for more resources. Police Commissioner Michael Harrison and some congressional leaders recently requesting more federal officers in the city's fight against crime.
We thought it was important to make specific requests.
What about other financial considerations? Economist Aniban Basu says it all comes down to economics, calling the factors feeding the city's population decline a vicious equilibrium.
If you create more jobs, you bring in more people. If you bring in more people decide to start businesses, whether retailers, restaurateurs. That creates more jobs. That attracts even more people. That increases tax base. That allows the city of Baltimore to invest more in quality of life.
And that's speaking to the mayor's comprehensive approach. I also reached out to Baltimore City Council's chair of the Public Safety Committee asking about this issue. I have not yet heard back.
7:35 and in your political news, newly released census data giving us insight into where people live and where they are leaving. Baltimore is now the smallest it's been in more than 100 years. Joining us live to discuss the political ripple effect these numbers will have, we have political analyst John Deedy. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So let's just start off. What are the political ramifications of a shrinking Baltimore?
Political ramifications, the major one is a shrinking city means shrinking political power. And that can be very harmful as far as trying to get things done, whether it be in Annapolis or in Washington. As far as what happens, Baltimore gets less representation. The suburbs, the urban areas get a little bit more representation long term. That's kind of the big thing right away as far as that. The other thing is federal aid is often tied to population. And when you have a shrinking population, you get less money from the feds.
Can you dig in a little more when you talk about the representation in Annapolis? What do you see happening there, especially as we're approaching redistricting?
I'll give you a really good breakdown on that. And that was a great question. The thing is, representation is done by the number of people who live in an area, and it has to be equal. You have to have basically the same number of representation in Western Maryland as you would for a district in Baltimore City. And as you lose representation, because of the fact that you lose population, you lose political influence. And what happens is you have fewer legislators fighting for you, and you have more legislators in Montgomery County, Howard County, and other areas fighting for their constituents. So this is a big hurt for the city of Baltimore.
How soon do you think the city would feel the effects of that?
They'll feel the effects really, I think, within about 3 years when you have a new legislature in Annapolis. And what happens is you'll have new members with new priorities that maybe weren't a concern 5 years ago. Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, when she became mayor in 2010, talked about trying to increase population in Baltimore, but I think starting with the events of Freddie Gray in 2015, it was going to be a downward trend, and people are going to look to leave, not stay.
And moving more nationally, too, was there anything that stuck out to you as far as how the census will affect the state leaders and handling of congressional redistricting?
There's one interesting aspect. The worst news for this was for Andy Harris. He represents the 1st congressional district in Maryland, which is the Eastern Shore and parts of Hartford County. 4 counties on the Eastern Shore lost population. So in other words, if you're going to redo his district, you have to add other areas. The other areas you would add would be people from Anne Arundel County, how the old 1st district was, or people from Baltimore County. Well, those areas would be featuring a lot of Democratic voters that don't like Andy Harris. And the other thing is this, of all the members of the Maryland congressional delegation, among Democrats and Republicans, he is probably the least favorite. So there's not going to be a desire to say this is a political player, has political influence. We got to do something to keep him in Washington. He's more likely going to be thrown over the side because of his temperament and personality.
And then that could also have some national impacts, too, as far as the majority in the House as well.